Okay, you ready for the last part? Advanced 3D. If this part doesn't make your computer melt, then you're not doing it right. Let's fasten our seatbelts and dig in. Okay, first thing we're going to do is duplicate this comp that we made. We're going to leave this one as is, and we're going to make a copy to work from. So the easiest way to do that is to just select it and go up to Edit and go down and choose Duplicate. Now we've got a comp 2. Go ahead and open that up, and it should look just like the first one. I'm going to save it real quick. Good idea to save it regularly at this point. If there's any point in this demo today where your computer is going to crash, it's going to be in this third step, so save it a lot. Okay, now to speed things up, I'm going to turn off the ambient light and the spotlight for now. We'll just go back to working with our plain old regular view. And let's move our playhead all the way back to the beginning. And then down here under gear, I want to get rid of the X rotation. So the easiest way to do that and to clear all the keyframes is to just click the little stopwatch here. And now the layer should just spin on the one axis, on the Z axis. Okay, now for what we're going to do next, we're going to have to do a little change to this object that we've imported. You can see that what it is it's gear.ai. It's linked to that Adobe Illustrator file that we placed in here. And normally that's what we want, because that way we can go back and edit the Illustrator file and the changes will show up automatically. But for this next step, which is going to involve extruding this shape and really turning it into an actual 3D object, After Effects is kind of fussy. It will only allow you to do those tricks if the layer is either a type layer or an After Effects shape layer. So an imported Illustrator file isn't going to work. But what we can do is we can convert this Illustrator file into a shape layer. To do that, just make sure it's selected, then go up to Layer, go down to Create, and choose Create Shapes from Vector Layer. After Effects will create a new layer here called Gear Outlines. It should look just like the first one. And it will keep the Gear AI layer in there, and it will just hide it and turn off the eyeball. We don't need it, so go ahead and select it and delete it. Like I said, this new layer is going to functionally be the same as the imported Illustrator file. The only big change being that we can't go back and edit it in Illustrator again and have the changes show up automatically. Okay, the next change we need to do is we need to change the renderer. So whenever we're displaying things in 3D in After Effects, it has to render them out. It has to do all the calculations of what this object is going to really look like in 3D space, where the light is going to come from, where the shadows are going to fall. And by default, we use the classic 3D renderer. That's the one that After Effects defaults to. It's the fastest. It'll put the least stress on your computer. But there are some things that it just can't do. So for this next effect, we're going to have to switch this renderer. And I'm going to go down here under my gear outlines, go down to geometry options, and choose change renderer. And we're going to switch it from classic 3D to Cinema 4D. A lot more things this can do, but again, it's going to run a little slower now. Go ahead and click OK. And again, you're not going to notice much of a change at this point, unless you dig into these geometry and material options, where there are now going to be some new choices. Okay, to see what this is really going to, these changes are going to do, it's going to be helpful to switch from the active camera to our custom view 1. So now we can see this in this sort of isometric 3D view. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some depth to this object by extruding it. So I'm going to go down to geometry options, and now we're going to see these options for bevel depth that just weren't there before until we switched to the Cinema 4D renderer. And what I want to do is take this extrusion depth and I'm going to bump it up. In fact, I'm going to bump it way up, all the way to 200. And you can see now this has taken our flat two-dimensional gear and it's given it thickness. One problem though is that the thickness is exactly the same color as the front of the gear. So what we want to do now is we want to change that side color so that we can see it a little more clearly. To do that, we need to go to our gear outlines layer. We're going to go down to contents and we're going to choose group 1. Now group 1 contains all of the paths that After Effects made when it converted our Illustrator file over. I just want to select that group, and then up here in the options at the top of the screen, I've got this little option that says Add with a triangle next to it. Click the triangle, and now I can add all sorts of other characteristics to the shape. And the one that I want to add in this case is side color. Go ahead and choose that. And now over here in my properties, you'll see we have a side color, and by default it's red. Let's leave it at red for right now because that'll show up really well. So if we scrub this, you can see now our gear is turning just like it did before, but now it actually has depth. It's a real 3D object. Let's switch back to the active camera. And again, I'm going to save it before we go any further because I don't trust it. And let's make another gear to go along with this one. We're going to have 2 gears that are spinning, and we're going to have their teeth mesh. So to do that, I'm going to go down here to Gear Outlines, and I'm going to choose Edit, Duplicate. So now I've got Gear Outlines 2, and I'm going to change its X position. So let's go down to Transform, and let's slide this X position over until it gets to be about, let's say about 1140, somewhere in there, or at least close to that. Okay, so now I have 2 gears, both of them in 3D, both of them spinning. There's just one problem. Can you see it? These gears would never work in real life. They're smashing into each other. One of them is turning the wrong direction. To fix that, I'm going to click on Gear Outlines 2 here, and I'm going to right-click or control-click. And from the pop-up menu, I'm going to choose Time and Time Reverse Layer. That will just take this layer and play it backwards. So now if I scrub this, you can see the gears are now turning opposite directions, just like they should. There's only one last problem. As you can see, the gears aren't lined up. So to fix that, we're going to go down to the orientation setting, and on the Z-axis, let's make it 15 degrees. Now that one has turned just 15 degrees when it starts, and when we spin it, these gears should mesh. You can see it's running kind of slowly here, but I can see that it's working. Okay, save it again. The last thing we're going to play around with is we're going to try creating a new camera of our own, and we're going to see what happens when we move that camera around. So to create a new camera in After Effects, it's really easy. Just go up to Layer, New, Camera. And you'll get these crazy settings. Just leave them all exactly as they are and click OK. Now, over here in our list of different cameras and views that we can look at, you'll now see our camera in the list, Camera 1. I can switch over and things look pretty much exactly the same as they did before. But we can change things now. We can change the way that we view this world, this 3D world that we've created, by manipulating the options in the camera. So if I go down to Transform, the first thing you're going to see is this setting called Point of Interest. And Point of Interest is just a fancy way of saying this is what the camera is pointing at right now. And if I slide that, say the X property of the point of interest side to side, it has the effect of turning the camera. Now, this can get a little confusing sometimes when you start to change these settings of the camera. But the thing to remember is the camera is just another object in After Effects, like everything else. And if we switch to a different view, say that custom view that we've been using before, now you'll see our camera actually shows up here with this projected box showing exactly what the camera sees. And now you see if I slide this point of interest side to side, you can see what's happening. The gears aren't moving, the background isn't moving. It's that camera that's tipping left to right. Let's move our point of interest to, I don't know, let's try about 890. Let's see what that looks like. If I switch back, that's fine. You can see now that we are centered on, we're looking at the exact middle point where these two gears are meeting each other. Now, no matter how I move the camera, it's going to continue to look at that point. So now let's try this out. Let's try changing the position of our camera. And again, I'll switch back to the custom view so we can see. If I move the X position of the camera, you can see the camera itself is moving in space. But the one thing that isn't changing is the point that the camera is looking at, that point of interest. This is the difference between pointing your camera at something and walking around the room, which is what we're doing right now, or when we move the point of interest, standing in one place and turning the camera to look at different places in the room. So let's try this. Let's take the position of our camera and let's move it all the way to 1400. I'm going to slide it all the way over here to the side. And if we switch over to see what that looks like by switching to the camera one view, you can see now we have that angle. One of the great things, and I'm not going to have a lot of time to go into this, as I said before, but one of the great things about After Effects is that pretty much everything that we do can be keyframed and changed over time. So let's see what happens if we change this position over time. With the playhead at the beginning, I'm going to click the stopwatch to create a keyframe. Now let's bring the playhead all the way to the end at 10 seconds. And now let's move the position of this camera. And I'm going to move it the other direction. Let's bring that number down. And notice as I do, that camera is moving to the left. But what's not changing is it's still looking at that one point where the two gears meet. Let's bring this down to about 600, somewhere near there. So now what's happened is, as I scrub this, the camera is moving through space, and as it does, the view of those gears is changing. And maybe an easier way to see this will be to go back to Custom View 1, and now as I scrub it, you can see exactly what that camera is doing. We just keyframed it to move from point 1 to point 2. All right, shall we bring it all together? The answer is yes. Yes, Matt, let's bring it all together. So let's switch to camera 1. And now, and this is where your computer is really going to be upset, because we're going to turn on the lights. Let's turn on the spotlight and the ambient light. And now we've got a bunch of things happening. We've got the gears that are turning, and they've been extruded to live in 3D space. We have a light. We actually have two lights. We have an ambient light that's creating light in the scene, and we have a spotlight, remember, that's moving across the scene. And that spotlight is casting shadows on the yellow solid color layer behind. And at the same time all of that is happening, our camera is moving across the scene as well. If I go really slowly here, you can see how the light is changing, the shadows are being calculated, the gears are turning, Our point of view is changing. And if I render this all out, this is what we made. Hooray!